Welcome to another one of our nutrition integrated presentations. This time we want to cover this really exciting area called longevity and the pursuit of agelessness. I think it's very much around sort of reframing everyone's perspective on something that we've been so well accustomed to, such as healthy aging, but how we're having a tweak towards a sort of different phrasing and a different sort of sentiment to it around longevity. I think the consumer interest is, of course, around agelessness. Now, this was a presentation we gave for NutraIngredients at their recent Sports and Active conference in Vienna. So, worth you weren't able to attend, this is some of the key messages that we delivered only a couple of weeks ago. So, as we get started, I think this is one of the great places to sort of frame. Now, these are sort of three images that I think represent some serious macro shifts in the perception of age and quality of life. So these are areas that you should go and have a little look at. And let me just give you a top line. On the left-hand side, you've very much got this new imagery of what we'd call the centenarians. So there's some really interesting work around the secrets of the blue zones. So these are these magical areas, to which I think there's four, sometimes reported five, but four areas where there are hotspots known for a high prevalence of people to live to 100 and beyond. Now, of course, the whole premise of those blue zones is not just the fact that they have a high population of people who have aged to 100 and beyond, but it's to try and understand why have they done that. Now, that's what the whole element of some of the Netflix documentaries and the science and some of the academics have looked to try and better understand. And of course, it links to exercise and of course, food and many other things as well. But the whole premise here is the fact that we are trying to learn from these group of sort of wonderful people that have lived a long and wonderful life. Now, in the middle, you've got this really interesting chap called Brian Johnson, and he's the man who wants to live forever. He's made a lot of money previously in selling a business to eBay, and then he spends around 2 million US dollars a year on biohacking his health. The whole premise here is that he believes that we should be able to reduce the impact of age and ideally live for as long as we possibly can. He does have the sort of the mantra and actually runs summits around not dying, or as he frames it, don't die. His premise here is all of these things that we can be able to do to biohack our body for the purposes of being able to live longer. And that's a really interesting concept. Whether everyone wants to live forever is, of course, another thing altogether. But I think people want to be healthier now for tomorrow. And I think everyone would share that sentiment. Now, the chap on the right-hand side, this is a really interesting one because you start to bring more of a societal edge to this. And this whole idea of this last frontier of identity politics, and is age one of the last areas of almost sort of the isms that exist. And now this chap was 69 and recently went to the law course in Holland for the purposes of trying to reduce his age from 69 to 49. He wanted to be able to self-define his age based on how he felt. Now, that wasn't based on anything other than he felt he was younger. He felt that it was inhibiting his ability to maximize his life. And in fact, he was being stereotyped as a 69-year-old, as opposed to someone who felt much younger and actually was doing more in his life, more akin to someone who was of a 49-year-old age, for example. If you take all of these areas together, you've got quite an interesting societal shift here in terms of how we're looking to understand age. And it's not seemingly helping people who are already old have a better quality of life. It's about the concept of helping people at a much younger age adopt better habits and behaviors now for the purposes of sort of altering the aging process over a period of time. And that is a subtle shift to all of this. Now, the concept, if I was to just sort of take a step back and define it, is effectively what you're saying is don't let age define you. Now, the imagery is taken from Science Research Wellness, slightly adapted, and they have this lovely slogan basically talking about you have two ages and you can change one. It's kind of like the premise of your sort of biological age. And you might be 45, for example, but your biological age might tell you you're 35 based on a whole host of metrics. So people could view you as a 45-year-old, but in many respects, you're biologically something much younger in terms of how well you look after yourselves. Now, the concept of agelessness, which is something I think is entwined or entrenched in longevity is this whole idea of not growing old or showing the effects of age, to be timeless and eternal. And that's this almost sort of the consumer link here to what this is longevity is all about, which is helping people maximizing their life today. It supports very much a societal shift in the erosion of traditional life stages. So I think people are adopting things different to what people did previously. You know, they're delaying getting married, they're almost spending more time in what they would call kidulthood. They're not engaging in the major five stages of having children, going to university at the same sort of typical rate that we used to do previously. So there's a massive shift in how people want to sort of maximize this sort of middle tier of their life and sort of kind of sage that age is not a barrier. Now that societal shift is really interesting because it's kind of capturing the imagination and it's reframing the conversation from one of fear, I fear age, I don't want to be old, I don't want to be decrepit as it were, to fearlessness. And it's about the maximizing of life as opposed to maintaining the best quality of life that you can. And I think if I'm to frame this in a B2B section, I think what you're seeing here is that the category really is longevity, which is a important shift from healthy aging. And the consumer connection and the emotion is to be ageless. Effectively, age is not defining you, or people aren't defining you as a certain age and therefore characterizing you by that, but they're reflecting on the fact that you individually are, maximizing your life no matter what age you are. Now, this concept, if you were to frame it in terms of a conceptual understanding, is quite simple. Now, this graph basically tells you that over time and with age, we tend to have an inevitable decline in health and general functionality. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't understand that with age, there will be a little bit of change in how we are, but physiologically and biologically. But the rate of decline is dependent on an individual's exercise and nutrition habits. Effectively, the better habits you have, the better quality of life you will have. Now, if you adopt this quite late, then of course you'll have already taken a course of action and you will possibly be the lower line as opposed to the higher line. Effectively, what I'm asking everyone who's listening to this is there is individual variation in terms of how you age, and it's all down to you. I tend to use the same analogy, and apologies if you've heard it before, but it's like having a high definition picture of yourself in the future. Every pixel is a sort of picture. Every pixel forms a part of that long-term picture, and every pixel is almost like a day or a eating habit or an exercise occasion. So every day that goes by, you're building a pixel. So every habit and exercise habit you adopt is forming the quality of your picture in the future. So do you want to be the top line or the bottom line? It's a personal choice, but the earlier you start, the better it is. Now, consumer evidence from partners like FMCG Gurus and others very much supports the sentiment that more people are interested in consuming something today for tomorrow. So they're interested in nutritional support for long-term health. And of course, they're reflecting also that this is not just a physical thing. It's not just aging and mobility. It's also a mental aspect. So the ability to have a healthy mind, healthy body. It's very much a combination of all of this. But there is also this whole area of agelessness and longevity that does link to appearance. And I just want to reflect that I actually think that one of the successes of collagen has largely been due to the fact that they, of course, were doing inner beauty, and that's intrinsic to a lot of people to appreciate how they look. But what effectively collagen have done is they've told people that that collagen, in terms of its effects on the aesthetic approach of how you look, can also is a very powerful tool to feeling ageless. Of course, if someone says you're looking good for your age, then that is a very powerful sort of emotive thing to be told that makes you feel good. As you can see here, the way that they describe themselves to feel better and live fuller lives. And I love this last bit that they believe that you can make every moment you're given and that your body shouldn't be a limitation, but a catalyst. And again, that's doubling down on this sentiment of maximizing life today, one of fearlessness and not one of fear. But it is intrinsic to more of an aesthetic outlook. You know, you look good to feel good, for example. And I think that is something we need to appreciate, that within longevity, there are different areas to what people are looking at. And appearance is probably one that's existed for a very long time. More recently, of course, though, and I refer back to Brian Johnson in terms of how old are you biologically, he's very much lived by example. He is his own personal experiment. So off the back of his daily routine of products, he is selling a whole load, he is selling his daily essentials, a proven health intervention. That was all based on him doing his own tests and kind of saying that he has slowed the pace of aging by the equivalent of 31 years. His testosterone index and biological age is reduced by 20 years and so on. Now, I'm not the right person to critique any of that, but broadly, he is capturing the imagination, the extreme of the extreme of trying to live for as long as possible. And there'll be some things in terms of what he's done that most people or some people will be uncomfortable with. But the sentiment of doing something today, nutrition, exercise, and other modalities to be healthier, of course, is something I think we can all understand and appreciate. And this is very much the extreme, but the perfect example for people to appreciate how a category can shift and then start creating itself. What Brian has done, though, is he's done the extreme, but he's very much gone and said, well, listen, anything could be an aging product. I mean, you could take glucosamine for your joints and say it's now a longevity product, and I have no problem with that. And in fact, the question is, what product isn't a longevity product if it is supporting your health? So at any stage, if I'm consuming something for my gut, for my brain, for my immunity, when is that not a healthy or longevity based product? But actually, in reality, the category of longevity is starting to evolve rapidly around people targeting what they would describe as the hallmarks of aging. Now, again, the academics will cover what all of this means, which are more important than others, and it's definitely an expanding evidence base. But what you're seeing is products are emerging that are focused on longevity in terms of targeting the hallmarks of aging, as opposed to just simply boosting overall health. Now, within this, I will say there's a lot of areas that most people, consumers, won't understand, but the one area that's definitely capturing the most attention in terms of the products that are materializing in the market that we track is cellular health. And we're already picking up 50 plus brands, 150 plus products specifically focused on cellular health. And that is an interesting area as people are building. Now, what you're seeing is more brands come to the market, traditionally specialists as opposed to generalists. And you can see science, research, wellness, as I referred to earlier. You have two ages, you can change one. And there you've got their hero product, and one that they started with is very much around cell health. You've got Timeline, a Swiss-based brand, science, it's not a secret. Your healthier future starts here, very much around sort of mitochondrial health and very similar in sort of proposition to some extent. And those represent specialist brands. On the right, Solga represents more of a generalist brand who've kind of gone on to the cellular health type trend around cellular protect, cellular energy, and cellular strength and renewal. And what that's really reflecting is just how more and more people are sort of jumping on to longevity and cellular health in terms of getting to the foundational approach of what this is all about. Now, ultimately, categories are defined by the evolution of specialists, the difference between owning something versus offering everything. And as more people engage in something like longevity and they're thinking about topics and they've read about a Brian Johnson, for example, they're tending to look for brands that typically specialize in these areas and are focused on these areas. That's what they do. It doesn't mean to say specialists always win out, by the way. Generalists have a huge role to play, but this is very much an important trigger to emphasizing just the kind of the path of maturity that this sort of new sentiment shift is on. It also reflects a quite shift in something we talk a lot about, which is innovation by communication. Some of these ingredients, resveratrol, M&M, have been around for quite some time, but what they're getting now more is innovation through communication, where people are becoming more interesting to it. But there's also now a whole host of new ingredients, algae, and examples like brand ingredients like Tetrasod, for example, that are doing a great example of bringing sort of their evidence and science around cellular health. This slide, it's not really for the purposes of trying to move behind, but this is just emphasizing the fact that you've already got a lot of products that are making cellular health claims. So this is just some of the ones that are available. And what you also start to see is this interesting dynamic between people just having an ingredient-led product versus a need state-led product. This is a classic sort of dynamic within the dietary supplement space of, do you call something the ingredient because that's what people have heard about, or do you call it a need state led product because people are looking for the benefit, so to speak. Now, all you need to take from this is there's already a lot of products making cellular health claims, and you can really see there's quite a heterogeneous category. So you can see some M&M, resveratrol, CoQ10, curcumin. You can see people lending to blood sugar control, and lots of different aspects to it. And so very quickly, longevity is becoming, and cellular health is becoming relevant to lots of different things. And to some extent, I think it needs to keep some control, at least for a period of time, to help ground it better, for more people to understand it better, for the possibilities of adopting it. But the category is evolving quickly. Interestingly, I would say that it does raise the question of what price you would put on your health. So CLP, so Leucistic Health, so La Prairie, another Swiss-based brand, you can see some of the products they have and the sort of monthly subscription figures that they are charging. Now, this is purposely an extreme example of where this comes from in terms of their own sort of clinics, for example, but their product execution, you can see the price associated to it. It's not your typical price associated to dietary supplements by any stretch of the imagination. And what you tend to see is products that do tend to have a more premium price tag. It's also lending the idea that longevity is taking existing products and almost doing next generation 2.0. So David Beckham and his longevity stack in IM8 is a really interesting example because they've got their sort of what is effectively a superfoods powder, but it's just on a biohacking journey where they're making more of their longevity based ingredients and claims. So they've taken an AG1 and they've just super pumped it, and they're making claims around energy, gut, brain, healthy aging, NAD, cellular repair, etc. And they've basically taken a product and created a 2.0 and moved it slightly into a longevity space. May work for them, may not work for them, but I would imagine that others will do something similar. And then just to finally say that as this area of longevity is evolving, in particular around sort of cellular health, then you're going to see more and more people take on this sort of new daily essential. So as people have taken a multivitamin or gut, I think people will look at the foundational approaches to health and be focused on it. We already have products that are solely focused about longevity, and they are longevity only products and around cell regeneration, for example. So Science Research Wellness on the left, along with Timeline, represent that. But we're also seeing how a cellular sort of approach to products is underpinning other needs. So in terms of beauty is cellular is Dose & Co.'s recent execution of how their beauty, hair, skin and nail products have got a cellular sort of focus to them. There is more opportunity around men's health and testosterone to have a cellular health component to it. And albeit tenuous, there is a potential interest for sports nutrition products, particularly around daily performance, maybe around protein superfoods, and adding in cellular health kind of components could have a really interesting area. I mean, again, David Beckham, maybe he is the perfect example of that, but you do have a lot of legacy sports nutrition consumers, slightly older now, still doing exercise, but want to be more foundational in their approach through the lens of longevity as opposed to being truly faster, higher, stronger. So there is a lot going on in this area. It's really fascinating. We're already capturing a lot of products. And so it's the key messages for you at this stage are really to think around more consumers are engaging with the concept of longevity and, of course, the desire to be ageless. There's definitely a growth of specialist brands, which does reflect sort of the growth curve of this category, and they are definitely challenging the convention of age. Cellular health is one of the primary areas of interest for many new ingredients and products. And when you're tending to find two tiers of products come through, longevity and cellular health, so that's the big sort of really specialist ones, but you're also seeing now more cellular health as a differentiator to existing areas. So cellular health as a proponent of beauty, cellular health as a proponent even of potentially joints, cellular health as a proponent of performance, for example, and you'll see that come to the fore. It's fast emerging, something you should be aware of. It's definitely a reframing of perspective, and it is very much around longevity, the new category, and the pursuit of agelessness, which is the consumer connection. I hope that was interesting. If you missed it in Vienna and you had FOMO, I hope this has served the purpose. If you want to know more from us at Nutrition Integrated and how we can help you understand this area and where the opportunities for innovation and white space are, then please do get in touch.